Today, my name is Dino Mazzone. I'm a partner with the law firm of Gattuso, Bouchard, Mazzone, and I'm here today with my wife, Barbara.
Hi, Dino.
Nice to do this again with you, Barbara.
Yes. Thank you for indulging me.
So I thought before we go any further, because Financial Services Group, these are all great titles that people give to in different law firms. What does that mean? What are you doing every day?
We represent lenders that provide money to our clients or to other clients or to clients that receive money from financial institutions or other lenders. So today we're going to talk about financings for legal entities. I don't want to get into personal loans or residential loans. That's very specialized and different. But this is more of a discussion on financings for legal entities. So legal entities can obtain monies by different ways. It can either be through traditional bank financings or loans. They can sell equity, some of their stock, either publicly, initial public offering, or private sales, or other types of very sophisticated and specialized transactions like securitization transactions where you pool a certain type of or category of assets and sell them and get money. But today we're gonna talk about traditional bank loans or bank financings.
And you're going to look at it from both sides, right? In a way,
I'll try as much as possible to keep it balanced, to reflect the practice that we do at our firm.
Because for the most part, I think you're on the banking end. Is that fair to say?
It's a little bit of a mix. So a lot on the banking end where you have the heavy stick, and then on the corporate end, the receiving the funds.
Okay, so that's
and
cool.
Both have their challenges, and both have their different ways of looking at things. So in traditional loans, why do companies need loans? So sometimes they need it for their general working capital purposes. Sometimes they need it because they have a specific project in mind and they need funds for it, or they want to buy a certain asset and they need funds for it. So today what we're going to talk about is more of the traditional loans for working capital requirements, because it's a little bit, it's more of the simpler model. The other ones just require different levels of expertise.
Sure.
And we'll save that for another webinar. So loans can be made available either by way of a credit facility. You'll hear words like a credit facility versus a loan. Are they saying the same things? Yes and no. A credit facility is more of an umbrella term where money is available and you can draw on it as you will, whereas a loan is really more of a one shot. I'm giving you all this money, then you're going to pay it back. So these are the two types of words that we use generally when we're dealing with traditional bank financing.
By the way, so just to interrupt you for a sec. So to be fair, so a credit facility could be a document that you may never draw upon at any given time.
Correct.
or at all, for that matter. I mean, that's probably rare, right? Somebody's not going to go through the whole effort of putting a credit facility in place.
But if you do that, and that does exist, you do still have to pay standby fees. So you have to be cognizant that any time money is made available, whether you use it or not, you're paying for it.
And again, before you get into the meat of it, why would somebody, well, let me put it in a different way. Would an entity go out and get a credit facility knowing that they may not necessarily need it, but just want to have it there?
Sometimes they want to be able to have the facility to make an acquisition that they don't know exactly that if it's going to happen, or that they see something, or they want to, and they're just planning ahead. And certainly you can do that, but be mindful. It's a good question. Be mindful that anytime money is set aside for you, there will be fees associated with that. And putting in place a credit agreement also means that there are fees being paid both to the bank and to the lawyers.
Okay,
so be mindful.
So to this simple mind, when I hear that, it's almost like a pre-approved mortgage. You got something in the background, that you're ready to go ahead and maybe potentially spend money on. But I know it's not exactly
it's a little bit,
it's a little bit more complicated. Yeah.
So depending on the amount of money that you want to access as a borrower, a potential borrower, or as a lender, you may have a single lender if the lender feels that that's enough coverage and it's willing to take the risk for this particular client. So we talk about a single lender loan. Sometimes we talk about a club deal. That's where maybe two or more creditors get together without being too complicated, where they're pooling their funds because maybe the thresholds are too much for the bank to take at that time. And then the ultimate is the syndicated financing. That's where you have a syndicate of lenders that act together to fund a certain project or to provide financings. And when you get into a syndicated, then, you have things like an agent, a collateral agent. It's a little bit more of a sophisticated product. And when you hear sophisticated here, it's going to be more people involved, longer to put in place, and more money to spend. So be mindful that these are the three types of categories of facilities made available by lenders.
And by the way, when you say it's going to take longer, presumably because in that syndicated loan, you have different banks.
Yes.
You have lawyers for all those different banks.
Yes.
You have everybody and his uncle involved. And so it's kind of herding cats.
It's kind of like herding cats. And it's the lead bank where the agent has to herd the cats, has to make sure it prepares them and gives them the information necessary. They have to enter into their own arrangement. There's a whole back office thing that has to happen, which is just takes time.
Sure.
So more time, more people involved. What types of lenders do we see? Today we'll talk about banks, but there's banks, regular Canadian banks, or you have foreign banks, meaning U.S. or abroad. You have funds, specialized funds, or you have private lenders. So these are generally the types of lenders that do provide financings for corporations.
I'm just curious, how are you seeing more and more foreign banks lending money to projects in Quebec or Canada generally?
For different things, on the construction or project financings, for the building of the bridges, for example, for the project for windmill project financings, you have a lot more outside or foreign banks that do get involved just because the amounts are enormous.
Sure. And
no Canadian bank is going to want, or one single lender is going to want to take that on. For more local deals, it's generally a local bank will deal with the local deals.
And again, just to touch on that point, are there any type of obstacles or restrictions by foreign banks coming into Canada giving?
There are, and that's a whole other webinar in and of itself. And then you have to consider, tax consequences, deductions. It becomes more complicated. That's why when you get into these syndicated type facilities, it's a longer process to put together into paper. And if you're on the bank side, it's a lot more work. And the bank earns its fees.
By the way, just as an anecdote, and what Barbara doesn't mention is the different time zones. So,
yes.
I've seen you work around the clock trying to,
Yeah, my favorite is Australia, where they're like 14 or 15 hours ahead of us. It's crazy time.
They see the deal before you. Right?
Yeah. So now that we've talked about the types of lenders and the types of is it a loan? Is it a credit facility? And is it a club deal? Is it not a club deal? Is it syndicated? What are the processes? Once that's been settled, what is the process? So I consider there to be three different phases. There's the due diligence phase, there's the documentation phase, and then there's the closing phase.
Okay, so due diligence, documentation, closing.
Correct. So on the due diligence phase, so if you're a lender and somebody comes and asks for money, you want to understand what's the type of business. What type of corporate entity am I dealing with? Is it a corporation? Is it a partnership? Is it a limited partnership? Is it a ULC, an NSALC? They're all different types of, or is it a trust, for example? We have to understand, because corporate law, as you know, will dictate who can sign, what types of authorizations are needed to authorize this. So it's very important for the lender to know what type of legal entity is going to be receiving the money. Do we want to have one borrower, two borrowers? Are we talking about different jurisdictions? Do we have guarantors? These are all the things that go into the due diligence phase on identifying the entities or the credit parties.
So with that in mind, just in terms of when the banks are about to make these loans and they're looking and they're doing their due diligence and looking at the corporate structures, as you've mentioned, the various ones, are you seeing a trend or are you seeing a resistance by banks to certain types of corporate structures? It may seem like perhaps a non-consequential question in some ways, but are banks maybe more prone to giving to one type of structure as opposed, or is it more a question of just addressing the risk?
It's really about addressing the risk, but you raise a very good point. There's a heightened obligation on the part of banks right now to know if we're dealing with legal entities. who is the entity behind
Correct.
this? Who has the ultimate control? So we hear in the industry, we hear about, know your customer information,
Right.
or, anti-terrorism legislation and things like that.
Right.
So the banks have a certain amount of diligence that they have to do to figure out at the end of the day, who are they lending the money to?
Right.
Okay, so it's not enough to provide, it's a company that has 3 shareholders. Well, if the 3 shareholders are individuals, that's great. It stops there.
Right.
But if one of the shareholders is a corporation or a partnership, then the bank goes, okay, what's the next level? They need to get to the ultimate owner or somebody that controls at least 25%. I think that's the number, because they want to make sure that the funds are not being used for purposes that are otherwise sanctioned.